Now, it wouldn't be right to have a wine-themed episode without some wine, right? Welcome to Flying for Flavor. So I hope you've poured yourself a large glass of something wonderful. I actually had to divide all of the interviews and segments for the entire visit for the Nova Scotia wine region into 2 full episodes. So that'll be bridged over episode 2 and 3. So this first episode is kind of an introduction to the region, the wines, the different varietals that are used there. I'm trying not to get too technical for it. For those of you who want more of the detailed or longer versions of the edited interviews, you'll be able to find them in the show notes. I've actually taken the audio portions, uploaded them to YouTube in their entirety. Some of them are longer than others. Some of them are just my actual taped tastings that I held at some of these wineries this summer. So make sure you check those out if you want more details on any of these wineries. And of course, I have included all the details for the wines that I tasted that I liked, links to how and where to buy them, as well as the direct links to the websites for each of the wineries that are featured today. We have a lot to get to for this episode, so let's get started. Just keep in mind that all of the interviews and tastings that I recorded were in a very busy time of year, time of day, as well as in a noisy environment for most times. So I did my best to clean up the audio volume. And of course, as I'm getting better at this whole podcast thing, I'm sure I'll even get better with the taping. But in the meantime, I hope you get the gist of it and I hope you enjoy it. So this first one, I really wanted to give you an introduction into one of the original grape varietals that was sort of the whole starting point for the Nova Scotia wine region, and it's called L'Acadie Blanc. And instead of me telling you about it, I thought I would leave it up to an expert. So here's the lovely Annie from Blomidon Estate Winery.
So did you hear the story behind the L'Acadie Blanc grape?
Not the story behind it. I do know that it is probably one of the flagship varietals here.
It's the signature grape of Nova Scotia, but it was created in Ontario actually.
Yes, I heard that.
Out of vinifera from Europe and a more winter hardy North American grape, and it didn't do really good in Ontario, and they moved it here and it just flourished. So they named it L'Acadie Blanc after the early settlers, les Acadiens.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's been very nice actually. That's been one of my go-tos that I've been trying to do. I don't think there's anyone growing it anymore in Ontario. I haven't heard of it.
I don't think so.
So this winery, all of the other ones were on the other side of the water.
Right.
Is there many on this side or no?
There's Planters Ridge, well, it's still on the other side, I guess, in Port Williams. So we're the only seaside winery. And we have this vineyard here, and also one near the Lookoff in Canning called the Woodside Vineyard. And between the two of them, we have 28 acres in production out of 65 acres of land. Yeah. So one of the unique characteristics about this seaside vineyard is that we get the tidal breeze coming in and out, day in and day out. And so that's really good to create a nice airflow throughout the vines, less mildew insects that settle in, because those like more of a stagnant air, and also less frost pockets, so our growing season sometimes can be a little bit longer. It moderates the temperature.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So you have your own grapes or do you go to other?
So right now we're doing 100% of our own grapes, and when we do ice wine, then we purchase those from, it's about 35 minutes from here.
And again, that was Annie from Blomidon Estate Winery, giving us a little bit of an introduction into the history of L'Acadie Blanc, as well as what makes a seaside winery so special. So for the rest of this particular episode, we're going to get into some more technical things besides just the different varietals that are used in the Nova Scotia wine region. There's going to be a few terms that you may not be familiar with if you haven't spent a lot of time in wineries or speaking with winemakers. So I thought you'd give you a bit of a introductory vocabulary lesson before we continue. So a couple of the terms that you're going to hear going forward, one of them is going to be called angel share. So for those of you who aren't knowledgeable about the whole process of fermentation and winemaking process, as well as for other alcohols, there's usually some evaporation that happens during the entire process. It's just nature's magic. But because of this little evaporation, there's an old terminology that's usually saying that that is the share that's left for the angels that goes up into the air. So it is called the angel share. So that's actually referred to a couple of times. The other term you're going to hear is the bung. So that is spelt B-U-N-G, and it is that large cork-like thing that actually plugs the hole in the wine barrel. So it's also referred to in casks as well for all my beer lovers out there. A couple of other terms that you hear quite often in Nova Scotia, they talk about quaffable, which basically just means easy to drink. That's basically the type of wines that they really enjoy and that sell well and are really great pairings for seafood and lighter dishes like they enjoy in the East Coast. And the other one that I hadn't heard before, but I think I heard every single winemaker there use, was the term flabby. And so we can giggle about it now with my Nova Scotian friends, but essentially, if a wine is being described as flabby, that just means it doesn't have enough acidity. It really is one of their hallmarks of their production of wines. There is their love of acidic levels in their wines. And so anything that they don't think lives up to the standard for that wine region for acid levels basically is being told it's a flabby wine. So they don't like flabby wines. So there's your little intro. Okay, so now we're going to get into the next step. So now we talked a little bit about the grape varietals. Now we're going to talk about some interesting and creative techniques. So I had the opportunity and pleasure of having lunch with Mike Mainguy. He is the winemaker at Luckett Vineyards, and we were having lunch on Crush Pad Bistro, not just with Mike, but with his lovely wife, Jillian, who's from the Wines of Nova Scotia, and of course, my husband, Norm, was there too. He'll never miss out on wine and lunch on a beautiful patio.
No, I was completely fascinated because I don't like to come someplace without actually doing a little bit of reading. Yeah. And as soon as I started reading through about the berried stuff, it was just sort of I'm thinking, so at what point did they think there's a hole over there that I need to put wine into?
So, I mean, at the beginning I put the brakes on it for a little while. It was, they're always good. I didn't even have any of these. I've just been eating them all day.
Oh my God. So good.
Our vineyard manager, his name's Marcel Cole. He's from Switzerland originally, and he knew of a winemaker out there who had tried it in Switzerland years ago with Chasselas and Saint Laurent grapes, which are common grapes in Switzerland. Yep. A few people actually try them around here. It's similar but different. Anyways, he was doing it kind of as like he was just interested in the results. Like, there was no science behind it. He just wanted to see. And he had a lot of trial and error with how he was approaching it. So we talked. We knew him. Like, Marcel was friends with him, and we talked with them, and you know, we bounced it back and forth. And I kind of put the brakes on it for a year or two. Like, I didn't want to. The idea of bearing, you know, nice French and American, whatever, wood underground was crazy to me. Like, it didn't seem like, why? Like, I got what we were trying to, you know, the idea, which really at its core, like, the romantic way of looking at it would be you're aging and maturing this wine and letting it evolve in the same, surrounded in the same soil that surrounds the vines that grow that wine.
Great story.
So it really, like, it sounds super cool. But I'm just like, are you thinking of the logistics behind, like, you know, I like logistics, and I'm just like, this is cool. We have to dig a giant hole, and we have to make sure that it's supported, and yet, you know, in contact enough with the barrels. They eventually wore me down. Marcel wore me down. We looked at it the first year we did it was 2011, and we did it with 3 barrels of red. And we actually got a barrel off. John Benoit owed me a barrel from another thing that completely unrelated. And he had a nice old, relatively neutral French oak barrel. I had and a couple of Americans at different stages. And so we took 3 varietals: Lucy Coolman, Marshall Foch, and Leon Malot, in even amounts, 1 barrel of each. And we dug this hole. We put some support beams down just in case the ground shifted. We buried it and we forgot about it. We didn't want to touch it. We didn't want it accessible. We just wanted to leave it there and see what happened, and a year later dig it up and see if there was any difference. And the way we justified it to ourselves was, worst case scenario, we've got 3 barrels of wine that we can't use. Something goes wrong, or that they implode, or because the guy in Switzerland had implosion and like problems underground that he didn't know about until a year later, right? So we were like, that's the worst case scenario. Best case scenario, we've got this really cool product that's done something different and unique in its evolution, and we either continue it or it's a one-off. Like we looked at it. We had done a major expansion in case production that year, so we looked at it like, well, yeah, worst case scenario, we're out a few barrels. It worked really well that first year with the red, so the following year we put a barrel of Lackady under as well for a white, and it was like super cool, really nice, and different. Like we would have controls in our barrel room with the reds, same blends, same varietals from the same part of the same vineyard. Actually, this vineyard out here around the foam box is where all the white goes. That's in there. We use it. I ripen this a little bit more before putting it in the ground compared to the rest of our Lackady that we use in other projects. The white was phenomenal. So like the next year after that, we put 18 barrels total under. So 10 for red and 8 for white. And I've stayed at that level every year since then. Now this current release, we just dug it up a month and a half ago and bottled it right away. But basically let it settle and cleaned it up with like a cheesecloth filtering just to take out any large grit and bottled it right out of the gate. And it's like we were bringing it into remember you texted me, I got home and you're like, oh, the berry's on the shelf. And I was like, I just physically brought it over there 20 minutes ago, and the guys in the store were telling me it wasn't even getting on the shelves, and people were taking it off. And it's not cheap. I mean, it's our most expensive product. There's a lot of work that goes into it.
Excavators don't come cheap.
They do not. And so I mean, so the science guy in me that's interested in what's happening down there. Yep. The main difference between that and our barrel room, if you're using the same wood, the same varietal, same barrels, made in the same vintage year, is that there's completely, at that depth, so the bottom of the barrel is about 10 feet and the top of the barrel is about 8 feet, yep. 2 foot diameter. There's like really, it's very constant down there. Like the temperature is not fluctuating, the humidity level is the same. At this point now, what we do as well is we don't dig the barrels up completely every year. We just expose the bung and pump them out and then refill them again. So we're afraid that if we tried to remove the barrel, it would fall apart. Like what's keeping those barrels together right now is the fact that the soil is completely surrounded this barrel, and it's preserving them nicely. It's really interesting when we remove the bung. So I should add, this one we did a little differently. We kept it underground for 28 months. I was only planning on 24, but the winter kind of got away from us, and we couldn't get to it for a few extra months. But it's really made a difference. Like it's a little bit more integrated, and it's like the wood's a little bit older, so the expression of wood's a little bit softer. Anyways, at that depth, nothing is really changing. There's constant temperature, constant humidity. Your exposure to oxygen is quite different, which is something that we're looking into more as a reason. And we've got some people from like Dalhousie and some of the universities that are in Department of Agriculture that are expressing some, like they want us to run sensors down, and we're kind of hesitant to do it because part of the charm is this unknown factor, right? Like we don't know if we're going to dig the hole up, if we're going to have lost a barrel, or it's funny because like we dig the hole up, I jump into it, we pull a little bit out of each barrel, and it's like, this one's good, and we pump it out right away, and we've never lost a barrel, we've never had anything turn from like an off barrel or a bacterial problem.
Is it the fourth year of the program, honey?
Yeah, so well, the fourth release.
Fourth release.
Going back to 2011,
Yeah, sorry,
I guess
so,
when
because
we
this
started.
was 2 years. Yeah.
So 11 we did like just red. 12 we did 3 red, one barrel of white.
Yeah.
12 we expanded it, did 10 red, 8 white, and then the 13 is what you're drinking now, and it's been the 14, and it's been 2 years. So over 2 years. It's really soft. We find like when we compare them, if you take the reds and the whites as well, if you take the same wine from the barrel room and you do a blind tasting, 9 out of 10 times, and 9 out of 10 people and we've done this here as like blind tasting experiment with staff, a whole range of tasters from novice to professional. They all prefer this one. And I don't know why. Like, it's just silly. Like, to me, it's a lot of work, and it's like, but the payoff when I get in there and I open up the bung, there's almost zero angel share. So there's very little dehydrating going on or evaporation going on, which to me tells me that the constant factor is pretty good. But the blind taste, it's such a subjective thing, right? And people, honestly, we don't tell them what they're tasting, and they always pick it blind every time. So what got me really interested in it, and probably what was able for the vineyard manager to sway me on board, was that I was reading about some guys in Napa, and there's some guys in Bordeaux who do it as well with the ocean water. So they're actually doing it under, I guess.
I read about that.
It's all come from like when they find wine in an old shipwreck.
That's
and
right.
they're like, this wine has not changed.
It's underground.
The temperature
Yeah.
has been the same for decades.
And that was a talk at the symposium. People were talking about this underwater stuff that's going on too. And so people were like, we want to try that out, right?
I mean, if we were a little closer to the water, we would probably roll a bunch of barrels underneath and just
Why
see
not?
what
See what
happens. And we're not against doing that. We have a new vineyard that we planted this year in Avonport, which is about 5 kilometers away, but it's much closer to this water. We could probably find a little, corner to do it in. Whether or not it's, I don't find like the locals rolling it down the river as we, they unclip the chain. But these guys in Napa and in Bordeaux, like off the Gironde, were doing it. Same thing. They were finding the blind results always favored the ones that were underwater. Now they have a whole other thing that they're dealing with salinity.
Yes,
Because
I can see that.
and a lot of people are wondering what is that saltwater pressure effect happening against the wood? How is that altering or changing the evolution of how that wine tastes? But it's interesting, and there's like very little written about it, but there's a few people who've done some papers on it. So it's been like a fun project that started as a little weird thing to that's something that's been hugely successful for us. And like it's crazy to me when I see people walk in and they're not even trying the wine; they're walking in with cases of it at $38 a bottle. I mean, like it's a heavy undertaking.
Oh, and you know what? And it is very unique. And you said that you left, this last vintage, you had to leave it for a little longer. Were you impressed enough that you think that you're going to experiment and leave the next?
I would prefer to do it.
Go a little longer?
It'll be where Pete and I have to like figure out the logistics of things, because at the rate that it's going now, it'll be sold out in like a month. And I don't know if he'll want to wait another year
that's true.
for it, because it is nice at the 12-month thing, but the 28-month was just like, let's see what happens.
Don't you just love stories of creativity like that? I mean, they buried their wine barrels. It was an experiment gone right. So if you're interested in learning more about this little adventure that the folks at Luckett Vineyard, so not just Mike Mingai, but their celebrity owner and local food and wine personality, Pete Luckett, the owner of Luckett Wineries, information directly to their website will be located, of course, in the show notes as usual. And if this is your first time listening, the show notes are always available at stephaniepichet.ca/flavor2 for this episode. So it'll always be in that same format, stephaniepichet.ca/flavor2. 2, and flavor is spelt the Canadian way, Flavour. So you'll find links to the contact for Luckett's, and you'll be able to find out about shipping. But if you're really interested in that berried wine, I would basically encourage you to take a trip there in the spring, because as soon as they go on the shelf, as you know, they go quickly. So that sound means it's time again for Fly in My Soup. This is the time of the episode where I get to rant a little bit. And since this is a wine-themed episode, I want to vent a little bit about wine tasting. More specifically, people who take the time to travel to a wine region and don't drink the local wine. Never understood it. Why bother even going? I actually met a couple during one of my wine region trips this summer. I'm not going to mention which one. And there was a couple that I was talking to who were telling me how they still haven't been able to bring themselves to drink the local wines because they were from originally California, and they have retired and moved up to Canada and to one of the wine region areas and have started a small business there. But they continually still drink their California wines because in their perspective, those wines are spectacular and other wine regions are just trying to get up close to California. So it was an amusing, shocking thing for me to listen to, not just because, yes, I do love California wines, but you're in a different wine region, and it's not that they were visiting there, they moved there. So it just seemed odd to choose to live in a particular wine region and not even appreciate or drink their local wines. Very odd. So I'm going to suggest to you to please make sure that when you're visiting the local wine regions or any wine region you visit, please always try the local wines, because tasting, sampling, and purchasing is what keeps those wineries in business. It helps to expand and open up new wineries all the time, which is just great for all of us wine lovers. One of the fun parts of dining out or even dining at home is pairing foods with wines. And so, like I promised in every episode, I'm going to be including some recipes. So in your show notes, you're going to find a few recipes that I think will pair great with not only some of the wines mentioned or referred to in this episode, but also just about any kind of lighter wines, especially from the Nova Scotia area. So you'll find in the show notes the recipe for lemon crusted salmon, which is very easy and simple, as well as a cucumber dill salad. And for those of you who want to take the next step and subscribe to our Flying for Flavor newsletter, you'll be able to get my recipe for a make-ahead crab souffle, which will be a very decadent and comforting thing that you can entertain your guests with on weekends this fall. So the newsletter comes out on October the 1st, so make sure that you sign up beforehand. You'll be able to find the link for signing up to the newsletter on any of the sidebars on my website, including the show notes page, which is stephaniepichet.ca/flavor2. Another claim to fame for the Nova Scotia wine region is their uber popular Tidal Bay brand. So Tidal Bay is one of the first recognized appellations in the Nova Scotia wine region. And it is not just a brand, but it is basically a style all to its own. They've managed to take fairly unknown hybrids or other grape varietals and combine them in such a way to create this beautifully balanced white wine that pairs spectacularly with seafood, which is, of course, another claim to fame for that area. So I had a chance to taste the newest of the Tidal Bay wines in the Nova Scotia winery lineup. It's their first week of opening at Lightfoot and Wolfville, and I got a chance to chat with the assistant winemaker, Rachel Lightfoot, for a full-on tasting of all of their wines, and of course I had to try their Tidal Bay to start.
So this is our Tidal Bay 2016.
Isn't that Tidal Bay nice?
It's so soft.
It's a 5-grape blend. So Lacady, Geisenheim, Riesling, Chardonnay, and Vidal. So 5 grapes. We've kind of kept ours away from some of the more like super aromatic things like Muscat. And I'll pour you our other entry-level white wine here in a second, and you'll kind of see why we wanted to keep them different enough. So our title bay, we want it to be really crisp, bright, fresh, something that I would drink with seafood, you know, and keep it on the drier side. So tons of that Nova Scotia acidity there, just really fresh and bright. 100%.
Yeah, it doesn't have a big nose to it at all.
No, it's more subdued, especially if you compare it to some of the other title bays, which are a little more aromatic. I get typically like pear, apple fruit, some tree fruit, some soft white flower florality, and on the palate I get a little bit of minerality and lemon.
A little bit, but it's not. But I said everything is. I don't like use the balance is not the word. It just sounds. It's like a little bit of this, 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 right? Like it's not one thing that's kind of overcharging everything else. That's soft, nice.
We're actually, it's funny right now because we get a lot of like calls from our friends in BC, and they're just like, man, you guys figured out this Tidal Bay thing, because Tidal Bay is hugely successful in that we figured out a way to market grapes that were otherwise unmarketable in the VQA system. Grapes like Macadie and Geisenheim 318 and Céval, like stuff that people are like, ooh, no, don't mention those things. We don't talk about those grapes. We talk about the Tidal Bay appellation and the brand and what it means. And like people in BC are like, we're still trying to figure out, and we argue daily about what we do best. Like you guys early figured out, what do we do consistently well? Aromatic white, sparkling wine, and just ride that train right out. And it works, and it makes sense from a sensory and production standpoint. So yeah, we're a bit of the envy right now. There's a lot of buzz happening here. After the Vancouver International Wine Festival in February, people were just like, "What is going on there? Why?" Like the lineups for the Nova Scotia wine were huge, and people in Ontario were like, my friends were texting me going, "They're all waiting to try Tidal Bay. No one wants." Yeah, it's funny. Like I'm just like, sorry guys, you know. Yeah. So we'll take it, you know, because we're still the new kid on the block and very low profile in the giant scheme of Canadian things, but we're growing exponentially.
So that was Mike Mainguy again bragging about Tidal Bay from Nova Scotia on how it's basically taken the world by storm. But I couldn't put all of the interviews in this episode, and some chats were a little more technical. Sometimes they were just longer and too long to actually include in this one particular episode. So I've added links with the full interviews in the show notes, as well as a few others. You're going to find an audio clip from, again, with Mike as I talk about and taste Luckett's Black Cab. I also included a video for Gina Haverstock from Gasbro Vineyards. She's the winemaker and my wine guru who basically started me on my full day of tasting in the Nova Scotia wine region. And there's also another short video and a full audio of the tasting that I had at Lightfoot and Wolfville, again with assistant winemaker Rachel Lightfoot. So make sure you check those out if you want a more in-depth behind the scenes on the tasting and wines from that Nova Scotia wine region. So it's time again for table topics. So this is the time in the show where I pull a random conversation starter from my table topics kits that I have here in my makeshift studio. And I answer it, and then I turn the tables and ask you to do the same. So since this is a wine-themed episode, it seemed fitting to pull a question from the wine table topics kit. So today's question is, if you could own a winery, what would you call it? And what kind of wines would you produce? So this is going out to all my wine lovers out there, because I'm sure you've daydreamed about doing this at one particular time or another. So I had given it some thought, and I know what kind of wines I would like to produce. I'm really into unfiltered wines lately. I don't know if it's just a more rounder mouthfeel, if I'm getting different notes than I normally would on the palate than just a classic filtered style, but I think unfiltered wines would be where I would go. And I would probably focus on the two grape varietals that I love the most, which is Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So a good unfiltered Chardonnay, big, round, buttery, but nice and soft. And then I would do a Pinot Noir, and I would do it exactly the same way. A soft, dry, really good mouthfeel, fairly long finish. So those are the two grape varietals, and I may tackle some other ones in an unfiltered style. I've tasted some really great ones over the last several months. A lot of wineries are really experimenting with natural wines and specifically more of the unfiltered styles, just to offer something different for the wine lover out there. So, wine name? I've always liked the name Lush, besides the fact that it basically just refers to someone who drinks a lot, which I think is kind of cheeky. I also happen to think it's a great descriptor for that style of wine. Unfiltered varieties are usually quite lush, in my opinion. So what would you name your favorite winery or your wines? Please feel free to send along your suggestions, your stories, your wine names, your favorite styles of wine. You can do so at any of the social media channels. I'm on Instagram and Twitter under my own name. And then on Facebook, you can find both my own page as well as the Flying for Flavor page, where you can click on the button saying send message, and you can either type out your answer to me or you can send me an audio message. If the audio message is fun and interesting or has a really great story, I may include it in a future episode. So if this episode intrigued you, you'll really love episode 3. I'm going to go more in depth about Nova Scotia's superstar sparkling producer, Benjamin Bridge. I got to spend quite a bit of time there doing barrel tasting and some of their other new releases that are coming out. And I'm going to learn more about their crowd pleaser, the Nova 7, which is probably more familiar to people in North America, as well as a couple of their other big up-and-coming showstoppers, specifically one that just made it onto the wine list at Gordon Ramsay. So yes, they're very, very excited. So make sure to stay tuned for episode 3, which comes up right after this on the same date. And if you want more information about all of these wineries, including the ones for episode 3, Benjamin Bridge, feel free to sign up for the Flying for Flavor newsletter. If not, you're going to miss out on bonus videos, interviews, and recipes like my Make Ahead crab souffle, which will be a perfect pairing with a clean and crisp Tidal Bay. So a few other things to close out this episode. Number 1, I'm including the link to the PDF and details on my upcoming hosted cruise down the Bordeaux in France. It is an all-inclusive cruise. Basically, you're drinking and eating with me in France. It's not a bad thing. So all the details are there with our friends from Expedia Cruise Ship Centers, as well as the contest details. So if you rate and like us and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, I will enter your name into a draw if you are from Ontario, Canada, to a private wine dinner that I'm going to host in your town. So yes, I will come to you anywhere in Ontario and host a dinner for 8 people, including 6 courses, full gourmet menu, including bring a staff member along with me to help serve and clean. And I will bring all of the wines for pairing for you. And I will also be gathering a lot of little prizes and gifts for the host, hostess, or winner that my friends here in Sudbury, business owners, have actually put together as a thank you for listening and subscribing. As always, I'd like to conclude the show by thanking all of the contributors for this particular episode. So, of course, from all of our vineyards that I visited, so Annie at Blomidon Estate Wineries, Mike Main Guy from Luckett Vineyards, his lovely wife, Jillian Main Guy from Wines of Nova Scotia, and Rachel Lightfoot from Lightfoot and Wolfville. So please make sure to visit their winery websites, which are all available on the show notes. And last of all, of course, thanks to you for listening. This is episode 2. Thanks for letting this wine geek have a fun time chatting about wine. And see you at episode 3.